A black man helps a racist white woman with groceries. She then calls the cops on him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over Marcus's neighborhood. As he stepped out of the grocery store, the sliding glass doors parting like curtains on a stage. He took a moment to inhale the crisp autumn air, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and ripe apples. The day had been exhausting, with hours spent restocking shelves, ringing up customers, and managing the occasional unruly child. Today had felt particularly long. Marcus glanced at his watch. It was almost 6 o'clock. He was ready to head home, where a cold drink and a well-deserved evening of relaxation awaited him. But as he turned to the parking lot, his eyes caught a familiar figure. Carol stood a few yards away, wrestling with several heavy grocery bags, her face flushed with frustration. She was a staple of the neighborhood, known not just for her white hair and sharp tongue, but also for her openly racist views. Marcus had heard plenty of stories from friends about her tirades against outsiders, as she called them. He hesitated, the decision weighing heavily on him. Do I really want to get involved? The thought flickered through his mind like a warning light. What if she says something? Yet there was something about the sight of Carol struggling that stirred his conscience. Maybe I can change her perspective, he thought. He had learned long ago that kindness could be a powerful tool against prejudice. With a deep breath, he pushed aside his reservations and walked toward her. Need a hand with those? He asked, trying to inject warmth into his voice. Carol looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to surprise, then settling into wary acceptance. If you want to, she said, her tone clipped. Marcus took the bags from her, feeling their weight in his arms. They were filled with groceries, but also with the tension that hung in the air between them. As they walked towards her car, he attempted small talk. How's your week been? Busy, she replied tersely, adjusting her glasses as she glanced sideways at him. He could sense her discomfort, a wall built high against any friendly overture. Maybe if I can just get her to talk, he thought, pushing forward. I saw your garden the other day. The flowers are looking great. Yeah, well, I put in a lot of work, she muttered, her eyes narrowing slightly as they approached her vehicle, a faded blue sedan. Too bad the neighborhood is changing. It's not like it used to be. Marcus felt the familiar sting of her words. Here it comes, he thought, bracing himself for the onslaught. He had heard her type before. People who believed their comfort was more important than the lives of others. People like you don't appreciate the hard work that goes into maintaining a community, she said, opening her car door with a flourish that seemed to punctuate her disdain. People like me? He echoed, keeping his voice steady. You mean people who want to live here and contribute? Carol turned sharply, her lip curling. I mean the kind of people who don't care about the values this neighborhood was built upon. Marcus felt a flicker of anger rising within him. I'm trying to help you, and you're throwing around stereotypes, he replied, frustration creeping into his tone. She lifted her chin defiantly, crossing her arms over her chest. I don't need help from someone like you. The words hit Marcus like a slap. He had expected resistance, but not this level of vitriol. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his purpose. I'm just trying to show some kindness, he said, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. You don't have to like me to accept help. As he placed the grocery bags into the trunk, he felt a surge of determination. If I can just get through to her, maybe... Suddenly, Carol's demeanor shifted again. She pulled her phone from her pocket and began typing furiously. What are you doing? Marcus asked, a knot forming in his stomach. Just calling the police, she said matter-of-factly, her eyes narrowing. I don't trust you around my things. The words sent a cold wave of panic coursing through Marcus. Wait, what? You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, she replied, raising her voice slightly. A black man helping a white woman with her groceries? Sounds suspicious to me. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, he felt the world shrink around him, the sounds of the parking lot fading into a dull roar. He had approached her with the intent to help, and now he was being painted as a threat. Please don't do this, he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to help you. Can't we just... Carol cut him off, her finger hovering over the call button. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I'll let them sort it out. Time seemed to freeze as Marcus's heart raced. This can't be happening, he thought, his mind spinning. He scanned the parking lot for any sign of help, but the few passers-by seemed oblivious to the escalating situation. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, in desperation creeping into his voice. "What do you think this is going to accomplish?" Carol's eyes glinted with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I'm protecting myself. You don't belong here." With a shaky hand, Marcus stepped back, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. "I'm not a criminal," he insisted, feeling the weight of her accusation pressing down on him. "Then you won't mind explaining that to the police when they get here," she shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. Panic swirled inside him, a tempest of confusion and anger. He had tried to extend a hand, and in return he was being treated like a criminal. The sting of her words burned deeply, but he forced himself to focus. "Keep your cool, Marcus. Don't give her any more power." "Fine," he said, crossing his arms, trying to project an air of calm. "But just know that I was trying to help you." "Yeah, right," Carol replied, her voice laced with sarcasm. As the seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity, Marcus felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He was caught in a web of stereotypes and prejudice, and there seemed to be no way out. How did it come to this, he thought, the absurdity of the situation gnawing at him. What was supposed to be a simple act of kindness had spiraled into something far darker. Marcus could feel his heart pounding against his ribcage as he stood there, the tension between him and Carol palpable. The fading light of the day seemed to deepen the shadows cast by their confrontation, and he fought the urge to glance around, hoping to find someone, anyone, who might intervene. But the parking lot remained eerily quiet, the occasional rustle of leaves the only sound punctuating the air. "Why don't you just put the phone down?" Marcus urged, keeping his tone as steady as he could manage. "You're making a mistake." Carol's grip on her phone tightened, her knuckles whitening. "And you're making me nervous," she shot back. "You could be anyone. You could be dangerous." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her bias, and Marcus felt the sting of her assumptions keenly. "Dangerous," he echoed, incredulity creeping into his voice. "I'm a guy who just finished a shift at the store. I'm trying to help you carry your groceries, and you think I'm dangerous?" "Just because you say it doesn't make it true," she retorted, her eyes flashing with indignation. "You're just another one of those people who think they can take advantage of my kindness." The irony of her words hit Marcus hard. He had extended a hand, and now she was twisting it against him. This isn't kindness, he thought bitterly. It's fear masked as self-defense. "Look," Marcus began, trying to appeal to whatever humanity was left in her. "I understand that you might be scared. The world is changing, and it's hard to adapt. But that doesn't mean you should treat people this way. Just because I'm black doesn't mean I'm a threat." Carol sneered, her expression hardening. "It's not just you. It's everything I see happening. I've lived here long enough to know what happens when neighborhoods change." "Change can be good," Marcus replied, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "People can bring new life, new ideas. You don't have to fear everyone who doesn't look like you." Her gaze shifted briefly, and for a split second, he thought he saw a flicker of doubt. But then she squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening again. "I'll take my chances with the police. At least they can protect me from whatever you're planning." The police, the mere mention of them sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He had seen too many incidents where the presence of law enforcement escalated situations rather than diffusing them. The thought of being misunderstood, of being seen as a criminal in front of officers, filled him with dread. "Please don't do this," he pleaded again, the desperation creeping into his voice. "You're putting me in a position I don't deserve. I only wanted to help." "You're not getting it, are you?" Carol's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think your intentions matter? They don't. All that matters is how I feel right now." Marcus took a step back, feeling defeated. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. I can't change her mind, he thought. Not like this. He needed to find a way out, both for himself and perhaps for her too. Look, why don't we just wait for the police, he suggested, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. I'll explain everything to them. You can tell them how I was just trying to help you. Yeah, right, she scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. You think they'll believe you? The media only showcases the bad ones. You'll be just another statistic. Just another statistic, Marcus repeated silently, the phrase echoing in his mind. It was a reality he knew all too well. He could already feel the walls closing in, the familiar sense of helplessness washing over him. A few moments passed, each tick of the clock feeling heavier than the last. Then all at once, the sound of sirens pierced the air, a wailing that seemed to punctuate the tension between them. Marcus felt a cold wave of anxiety sweep over him, and he glanced toward the entrance of the parking lot just as a police car rounded the corner. "Here they come," he muttered, his stomach knotting. Carol straightened up, her demeanor shifting from defensive to self-righteous. "This will teach you to mess with me," she said, her voice laden with vindication. The police car rolled to a stop and 2 officers stepped out, their expressions neutral but alert. Marcus's heart raced as they approached, the weight of their presence amplifying the already tense atmosphere. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" one officer asked, directing his attention to Carol. "Just look at him," she exclaimed, waving her hand dismissively at Marcus. "He was trying to steal my groceries. I don't know what he was planning, but I felt threatened." The officers turned their attention to Marcus, and he felt their scrutiny like a spotlight burning into him. "This is it," he thought. "I have to stand my ground." "Officers, that's not what happened," Marcus interjected, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I was just helping her with her bags. I work at the grocery store right there." He pointed toward the store, hoping they would see his uniform still clinging to him like a shield. "Is that true, ma'am?" the second officer asked Carol, his tone even as he maintained eye contact with Marcus. "Yes," Carol replied, her voice rising in pitch. "But he was too friendly. How can I trust someone who looks like him?" The words cut deeper than any knife. Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting back the anger that threatened to spill over. "They're supposed to protect you, not judge you," he thought bitterly. "Ma'am, we need to take all statements into consideration," the first officer said, glancing between them. "We'll need to hear both sides before making any decisions." "Decisions?" Carol scoffed, her indignation palpable. "I'm the one who called you. I'm the one who was threatened." "Threatened how?" the second officer pressed, his voice calm but firm. "What exactly did he do?" "He approached me. He was too close," Carol exclaimed, her voice escalating. "I've seen it on the news. You know what happens when you let someone like him get too close?" Marcus felt his chest tighten at her words. Someone like him. The phrase hung in the air, a haunting reminder of the prejudices that shape their world. "Ma'am," the first officer said, maintaining his composure, "we can't act on assumptions. We need to know what actually happened here." "Just ask him," Carol insisted, pointing a finger at Marcus. "He's lying." "Ma'am, let's keep this civil," the second officer interjected, finally shifting his attention back to Marcus. "Can you tell us your side of the story?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I saw her struggling with her groceries," he began, meeting the officer's gaze. "I offered to help her, and she accepted. That's it. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I just wanted to assist." The officers exchanged a glance, and Marcus sensed the skepticism lingering in the air. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "Will they believe me?" he thought, desperation creeping into his mind. "Will they see me as just another statistic?" "Is there anyone who can corroborate your story?" the first officer asked, his tone shifting slightly. Marcus shook his head, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "No, but I swear I'm telling the truth. I work right there." He pointed again to the store, hoping they would understand. "You can ask my manager." Carol, however, seized the moment. "Why should we believe him? Just look at him. He's probably got a record. Why else would he be lurking around here?" "Lurking?" Marcus echoed incredulously, his voice rising. "I was leaving work. I was trying to help you." The second officer raised a hand, attempting to calm the situation. "All right, let's take a step back. We'll need to hear from your manager to verify your story." "Fine," Carol huffed, crossing her arms defiantly. As the officers began to discuss their next steps, Marcus felt a strange sense of resolve budding within him. This wasn't how he wanted to spend his evening, but he wouldn't let Carol's prejudices define him. As uncomfortable as it was, he realized he had a chance to stand up for himself, to say something that might resonate beyond this moment. "Look," he said, addressing both officers and Carol, "I know this is uncomfortable for all of us, but if we can just take a moment to breathe and talk, maybe we can avoid making this a bigger issue than it needs to be." The first officer nodded slowly, contemplating his words. That's a good idea. Let's take a moment to figure this out. As the tension hung thick in the air, Marcus ardently hoped that truth would play a role in this unfolding drama, even if it felt like he was fighting against a tide of fear and misunderstanding. The air felt thick with suspicion as Marcus stood under the scrutiny of the police officers, their uniforms stark against the backdrop of the autumn leaves swirling around them. The officer who had been speaking, a man in his early 30s with a neatly trimmed beard, shifted his weight slightly, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Carol's presence loomed large, her arms crossed, and her expression a mix of defiance and self-righteousness. "Let's take a moment here," the officer said, attempting to ease the tension. "We're not here to escalate anything, but we need to understand what happened. This is serious." "Serious?" Carol interjected, her voice sharp. "Do you know what it's like to feel threatened in your own neighborhood? It's not just serious, it's terrifying." "Ma'am," the second officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, said, "we understand that, but we also need to listen to both sides. Can you tell us what led to you calling us?" Carol straightened her posture, her expression shifting to one of faux innocence. "I was just minding my own business, trying to load my groceries into my car, when he approached me. I didn't know what he wanted. He could have been any kind of criminal." The accusation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He felt the blood rush to his face as he struggled to keep his composure. Criminal? The word echoed in his mind, a label he had fought against his entire life. "Ma'am," the male officer said, "did he threaten you in any way? Did he try to take anything from you?" "No," she admitted, her voice faltering for a moment. "But he was too friendly. You can't trust that." Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Too friendly?" He thought, "Is that really the standard we're using now?" "Can you remember anything specific he said?" the female officer prompted, maintaining her professional demeanor. "He said he was just trying to help," Carol replied, her tone dripping with skepticism. "But how can I trust that? People like him—" "People like him?" Marcus interrupted, unable to hold back any longer. "What does that even mean? I was just trying to be a decent human being." "Let's keep it civil," the male officer warned, stepping slightly between them. "Marcus, we need to hear your version of events without interruptions." Taking a deep breath, Marcus forced himself to focus. "I saw Carol struggling with her groceries, and I approached her to help. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to assist her because I believed in being kind." "Kindness doesn't always come from the right place," Carol shot back, her voice icy. "Is that so?" Marcus said, his frustration growing. "So now offering help makes me suspect? What about you? Your reaction says more about you than it does about me." "Enough," the female officer said, raising a hand to stop the escalating argument. "We're not here to argue. We need to get to the bottom of this." Marcus felt a flicker of hope as the officer sought to mediate the situation. Perhaps they could see through Carol's prejudices and understand that not every interaction was colored by race. "Can we call your manager?" the male officer asked Marcus. "Verify your employment. That should clarify your intentions." "Sure," Marcus replied, his mind racing. "I'll give you the number. My manager will back me up." As he fished his phone out of his pocket, Carol's eyes narrowed. "You think that makes a difference? Just because you work at that store? You could still be up to no good." Marcus felt his hands tremble slightly as he dialed the store's number, the pressure of the situation weighing heavily on him. He didn't want to involve anyone else, but he knew he had no choice. "Hello, this is Marcus," he said when someone picked up. "Could you please get Mr. Thompson for me? It's urgent." A few moments later, his manager came on the line. The air hung thick with tension as Marcus stood facing the two police officers, their scrutinizing gazes weighing heavily upon him. Carol, standing beside her car, radiated an air of self-righteousness, her arms crossed defiantly across her chest. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Okay, stay calm," he told himself. "They have to listen to reason." "Officers," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within, "I can assure you that I was simply trying to help Ms. Carol with her groceries. I work at the store right there, and I saw her struggling. I just wanted to lend a hand." While the first officer, a graying man with a stern expression, regarded Marcus with a neutral gaze. "I understand, son, But we need to get all the facts straight before we can determine what happened here. Marcus nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. At least they're willing to listen, he thought. Well, I can tell you exactly what happened, Carol interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. This man was acting suspicious, and I felt threatened. I have every right to call the police when I feel unsafe. The second officer, a younger man with a more compassionate demeanor, turned to Carol. Ma'am, can you please explain what exactly happened that made you feel threatened? Carol's eyes narrowed as she glared at Marcus. He just approached me out of nowhere, offering to help with my groceries. I don't know him, and I certainly don't trust him. Who knows what his real intentions were? Marcus felt a surge of indignation rise within him. Real intentions, he thought, his jaw tightening. I was just trying to help. Officers, I can assure you that my only intention was to assist Ms. Carol, he interjected, keeping his tone as level as possible. I saw her struggling, and I wanted to do a good deed. That's all. The first officer held up a hand, silencing Marcus. We understand, son, but we need to hear Ms. Carol's side of the story as well. Carol seized the opportunity, her voice rising with each word. He was too close, too friendly. You know how these things can escalate. I've seen it on the news, and I wasn't going to take any chances. I had to protect myself. Marcus felt his heart sink as he listened to her words. Protect herself? He thought, incredulity seeping into his mind. From what exactly? The second officer nodded thoughtfully, his brow furrowed. I see. So you felt threatened by his proximity and demeanor? Exactly, Carol exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of vindication. I know how these things can go. I've seen it happen before. I wasn't going to let myself be a victim. Marcus felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, the implication clear. A victim? He thought, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. I was trying to help, and she sees me as a threat? Officers, I can assure you that I pose no threat to Ms. Carol, he said, his voice taut with frustration. I was simply trying to lend a hand. I have no history of violence or criminal behavior. I'm a hard-working man who was just trying to do a good deed. The first officer nodded, his expression unreadable. We understand, son, but we still need to verify your story. Verify? Carol scoffed, her eyes narrowing. You're really going to take his word over mine? The second officer raised a hand, attempting to diffuse the tension. Ma'am, we're simply trying to gather all the facts before making any conclusions. That's our job. Carol's lips thinned into a tight, disapproving line. Well, I know what I saw, and I know what kind of people I need to protect myself from. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine at her words. What kind of people? He thought, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Is that really how she sees me? The first officer cleared his throat, drawing both their attention. All right, let's take a step back and try to understand what's going on here. Ms. Carol, can you tell us a bit more about why you felt threatened? Carol straightened her posture, her chin lifted in defiance. Well, officer, as I said, this man just approached me out of nowhere, offering to help with my groceries. I don't know him, and I certainly don't trust him. You know how these things can go. 1 minute they're being helpful, and the next they're causing trouble. Marcus felt his blood boil at her words. Causing trouble, he thought, his jaw clenching. I was trying to be a decent human being. The second officer nodded, his expression thoughtful. I understand your concern, ma'am, but can you tell us specifically what he did that made you feel threatened? Carol's eyes narrowed as she turned her gaze to Marcus. Well, for one, he was standing too close to me, and he was being overly friendly, trying to strike up a conversation. I've seen the news. I know how these things can escalate. I had to protect myself. Marcus felt his heart racing, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Protect herself? He thought, the absurdity of the situation weighing heavily on him. From what? Me trying to be kind? The first officer nodded, his expression still neutral. I see. And did he make any threats or hostile gestures towards you? Carol shook her head, her lips pursed in a tight frown. No, but I could tell he was up to no good. You can just tell with these types of people. Marcus felt a surge of anger rise within him, and he had to fight the urge to lash out. These types of people, he thought, his mind racing. I'm not some criminal. I'm a person trying to help. The second officer glanced at Marcus, his expression sympathetic. Sir, can you clarify what exactly happened from your perspective? Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Officers, I can assure you that I was simply trying to help Ms. Carroll with her groceries. I saw her struggling, and I wanted to do a good deed. I have no history of violence or criminal behavior, and I certainly didn't intend to threaten or intimidate her in any way. The first officer nodded, his gaze thoughtful. All right, son, we understand that you were trying to help, but we still need to verify your story and get a clearer picture of what happened here. Marcus felt a glimmer of hope, but the weight of Carol's accusations still hung heavy in the air. I just hope they can see the truth, he thought, his mind racing with the implications of what might happen next. As the officers continued to question both him and Carol, Marcus couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. This is the kind of situation I've heard about a million times, he thought, his heart sinking. And now I'm right in the middle of it. The tension in the air was palpable, and Marcus knew that the outcome of this confrontation could have far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for the entire community. He steeled himself, determined to stand his ground and fight against the prejudices that threatened to consume him. The police officers exchanged glances, and Marcus felt the weight of their scrutiny intensify. The first officer, who had been taking notes, looked up and cleared his throat. All right, Ms. Carroll, we need to verify your claims. You mentioned feeling threatened. Can you explain why? Carol took a step closer to the officer, her voice rising with indignation. It's simple. He approached me too quickly and I didn't know what he wanted. It's common sense to be cautious. Caution is understandable, the second officer replied, his tone measured. But we need specifics. Did he say anything to you that made you feel unsafe? No, but it's not just what he said, she exclaimed, her frustration palpable. It's the way he looked at me, the way he was standing. He was too close and I felt cornered. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Too close? He thought, incredulity washing over him. He had merely been trying to assist her, and she was twisting it into something sinister. The first officer turned to Marcus, his expression calm but serious. Sir, can you respond to that? Did you feel you were invading her personal space? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I was walking beside her. Not invading her space. I was just trying to help. I wasn't trying to make her uncomfortable. Carol interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, I'm sure you didn't mean to make me uncomfortable, but you don't get to decide how I feel. Ma'am, we need to focus on what happened here, the second officer said, attempting to keep the conversation on track. We're not here to discuss feelings, but actions. Actions? Carol scoffed. His actions were suspicious from the start. I mean, who just offers to help a stranger without ulterior motives? Marcus felt a surge of anger. This is ridiculous, he thought. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. I was just being kind. It's not suspicious to help someone carrying groceries. Ma'am, please allow him to speak, the first officer urged, trying to mediate the escalating tension. What were your intentions, Marcus? To help her, plain and simple, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I see someone struggling, and I want to help. That's it. I'm not a criminal. I'm a person who just finished a long day at work. The second officer nodded, his demeanor surprisingly sympathetic. We get that, Marcus, but Ms. Carroll is scared, and fear can cloud judgment. We need to find a way to resolve this without further escalation. Scared? Carol echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm not scared. I'm cautious. There's a difference. Caution is good, the first officer said, but it shouldn't lead to false accusations. We need to ensure everyone's safety here, including yours, Marcus. As the officers continued to discuss the situation, Marcus's mind raced. This is spiraling out of control, he thought. He could almost feel the weight of the community's eyes upon him, the judgment that would follow if this ended poorly. He couldn't let Carol's prejudices dictate the narrative. Listen, Marcus said, his voice firm yet calm. I understand that you're worried about safety, Ms. Carroll, but your fear shouldn't be used as justification for calling the police on someone who was trying to help you. This could have been an opportunity for understanding. Carol rolled her eyes, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. Opportunity? You think I'm going to sit and chat with someone I don't know? That's naive. Maybe it is, Marcus replied, frustration creeping into his tone. But what you're doing right now is far more harmful. You're perpetuating a cycle of fear and misunderstanding. The second officer raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Marcus's words. You make a valid point, sir. Fear can lead to quick judgments, which is why we need to be careful in how we handle this. That's right, Marcus said, feeling a sense of determination swelling within him. We need to break down these barriers, not reinforce them. If we can't trust each other, how can we expect to live in a community together? Carol's expression hardened, but the second officer seemed to consider Marcus's words. I appreciate your perspective, Marcus, but we still need to gather more information. Can you tell us if there's anyone who can vouch for your character or your story? Marcus thought for a moment, a flicker of hope igniting within him. Yes, my manager at the grocery store. If you give me a moment, I can call him to verify what happened. All right, the first officer said, nodding. Let's do that. It will help clarify the situation. Carol crossed her arms, her posture stiff. See? Even he knows he needs backup. That's suspicious. No, it's called being responsible. Marcus shot back, unable to contain his frustration any longer. If I were in your position, I'd want to ensure the truth comes out. The second officer stepped forward, attempting to maintain peace. Let's take a breath here. Marcus, go ahead and call your manager. We'll wait a moment. Marcus nodded and pulled out his phone, fingers shaking slightly as he dialed. His manager, Greg, answered on the second ring. Hey, Marcus, everything okay? Not really, Marcus replied, his voice low. I need you to come to the parking lot. There's been a misunderstanding with a customer and the police. Misunderstanding? Greg asked, concern lacing his tone. What happened? I was helping Ms. Carol with her groceries, and she accused me of trying to steal them. Now the police are here, and I need you to back me up. On my way, Greg said, the urgency evident in his voice. Marcus hung up and turned back to the officers and Carol. My manager is on his way. He can confirm that I was just trying to help. Carol scoffed. Of course he's going to side with you. You're the one who's going to get sympathy because you're the victim here. Victim? Marcus echoed, disbelief flooding his expression. I'm not the one who called the police on someone for helping. You're the one who's afraid of what you don't understand. The tension was palpable, and Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to stay strong, not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced similar situations. As they waited for Greg to arrive, Marcus took a moment to collect his thoughts. This isn't just about me, he reminded himself. It's about changing perceptions, challenging the stereotypes that hold people back. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity as Carol continued to glare at him, her disdain palpable. He felt the anger rising within him once again, but he forced himself to breathe deeply, reminding himself of the importance of composure in moments like this. When Greg finally arrived, he jumped out of his car, concern etched across his face. What's going on, Marcus? He asked, rushing over. Just explaining a misunderstanding with Ms. Carol, Marcus replied, gesturing to her. I was helping her with her groceries, and she accused me of trying to steal them. Now the police are involved. Greg turned to the officers, his expression shifting from concern to determination. I'm Greg, Marcus's manager. I can confirm that he's a hard worker and has no history of trouble. He was just trying to be helpful. Carol's eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed to falter. The officers exchanged glances, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they would finally see the truth in all of this. Thank you, Greg, the first officer said, his tone shifting slightly. Your perspective is valuable here. We appreciate your input. As the tension began to shift, Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. Maybe this will end well after all, he thought. But he remained cautious. He knew that the battle against prejudice and misunderstanding was far from over. With Greg's support, Marcus hoped they could finally break through the barriers that had been erected, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced unfair judgment based on the color of their skin. The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken potential, as they stood together, ready to confront the prejudices that had led them all here. The tension in the parking lot hung thick as Marcus, Greg, and the two police officers stood together, the weight of the situation palpable. Carol, still standing beside her car, appeared increasingly agitated, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The confrontation had shifted, but the atmosphere remained fraught with uncertainty. Thank you for coming, Greg, Marcus said, glancing at his manager, hoping for reassurance. "I appreciate you being here." "No problem, Marcus," Greg replied, his voice calm but urgent. "I want to make sure this gets sorted out. Let's get to the bottom of this." The first officer turned his attention back to Carol. "Ma'am, we've heard your account of the situation, but it's important that we consider all perspectives. Can you tell us again what made you feel threatened?" Carol's eyes darted between the officers and Marcus, her frustration palpable. "I've already explained. He approached me too quickly and offered help. I didn't know what he was capable of. People like him—" "Ma'am, we need you to focus on facts, not assumption," the second officer interjected, trying to keep the conversation civil. "Did he make any threats? Did he touch you?" Carol hesitated, her bravado faltering as she realized the gravity of her accusations. "No, but—" "Then we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions," Greg said, stepping forward. "Marcus was simply trying to help. He's not a criminal, he works hard and is a respected member of our team." Carol's expression hardened. "I don't care what you think. I felt scared and that's enough for me to call the police." "Fear is valid," the first officer acknowledged, "but it shouldn't lead to false accusations. We need to ensure everyone's rights are respected here, including Marcus's." Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that Carol was still determined to paint him as a threat. This situation shouldn't have escalated like this, he thought, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Why can't she just admit she overreacted? "I'm not saying he's a criminal," Carol said defiantly, "but it's important to be cautious in today's world. You never know who's out there." "Exactly," Marcus said, unable to hold back any longer. "And that caution shouldn't come at the expense of someone's dignity and safety. I was trying to be kind, and now I'm standing here being treated like a criminal for it." The first officer nodded, sensing the rising tempers. "Let's take a moment to cool down. Ma'am, we understand your concern for your safety, but we have to make sure we're not allowing fear to dictate our actions." As the officers discussed the situation further, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of weariness wash over him. He had tried to do something good, to extend a hand to someone in need, and yet here he was, fighting against the very prejudices he had hoped to challenge. Greg placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Just stay calm. We're getting there. Let's focus on the facts." With the officers continuing their discussion, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were just skimming the surface of a much deeper problem. "This isn't just about me," he thought. "It's about how fear and ignorance can warp perceptions and lead to dangerous assumptions." "Can we at least agree that this could have been handled differently?" Greg suggested, turning to Carol. "This didn't need to escalate to a police call." Carol's expression softened momentarily, but then she shook her head. "I don't know. I just see so many stories on the news about people getting hurt. I wasn't going to take any chances." "Understandable," the second officer replied, his voice steady. "But it's crucial to weigh the consequences of our actions. Calling the police is a serious step that shouldn't be taken lightly." Just then, a small group of neighbors began to gather at the edge of the parking lot, drawn by the sight of the police cars and the escalating confrontation. Marcus recognized a few familiar faces, and he felt his heart race at the thought of being judged in front of them. "Is there a problem here?" one of the neighbors called out, a concerned expression on her face. "Just a misunderstanding," Greg replied quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Marcus was helping Ms. Carol with her groceries, and there was a misunderstanding that led to a call to the police. The neighbor frowned, glancing between Marcus and Carol. "Is that what happened? I've seen her around, and I didn't think she'd be the type to call the cops on someone for helping her." Carol's face flushed with embarrassment, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the second officer spoke first. "We're just gathering information to ensure everyone's safety. It's important that we don't jump to conclusions based on fear or assumptions." "Exactly," Marcus chimed in, feeling the support of the neighbors lifting him. "I was simply trying to help. This isn't about me being a threat. It's about understanding each other better." The group of neighbors murmured among themselves, and Marcus felt a small sense of hope. Maybe this was an opportunity to shed light on the issue, to show that kindness could prevail over fear. "I know it's hard to trust people sometimes," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "But if we don't take the time to understand one another, we're going to keep living in this cycle of fear and misunderstanding." The first officer nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good point, Marcus. It's essential for communities to come together and communicate openly. We don't want to see situations escalate unnecessarily. Carol's expression seemed to shift as she listened to the conversation. The anger in her eyes gave way to something more vulnerable. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she admitted, her voice softer. I guess I overreacted. Overreacting is something we all do at times, Greg said gently. It's okay to feel scared, but it's how we respond to that fear that truly matters. Marcus watched as the tension in Carol's shoulders eased slightly. Maybe she's beginning to understand, he thought, a flicker of hope igniting within him. I'm sorry, Marcus, Carol said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to accuse you of something you didn't do. I just let my fears take over. It's all right, Carol, Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. What matters is that we can learn from this. Let's work toward understanding, not fear. The officer stepped back, allowing the conversation to flow more freely. We appreciate your honesty, ma'am, the first officer said. It takes courage to acknowledge when we've made a mistake. As the neighbors continued to gather, Marcus felt a sense of solidarity building around him. It was as if they were all rallying for the same cause, understanding and compassion. Let's use this as a chance to build bridges, not walls, Marcus suggested, looking at the group of neighbors. We can create a community where everyone feels safe and valued, regardless of background. The second officer nodded, a smile breaking through his previously stern demeanor. That's the spirit. We're all in this together, and it starts with open dialogue and understanding. With the air of hostility dissipating, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had faced the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of agreement and support echoed around him. Carol, visibly shaken but determined, took a step forward. Maybe I need to change how I view the world, she said quietly, meeting Marcus's gaze. I don't want to live in fear anymore. Neither do I, Marcus replied, feeling a sense of connection that transcended their initial conflict. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the parking lot, Marcus knew that this moment marked the beginning of something new, a chance for understanding and healing in a world that often felt divided. In that moment, they were all reminded that kindness could break down even the most daunting walls, and it was a lesson worth holding on to. As the last rays of sunlight faded away, the parking lot felt lighter than it had just moments before. The tension that had once gripped the air was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of understanding. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight on his shoulders begin to lift as he and Carol shared a moment of silent acknowledgement. Thank you for being willing to talk, Marcus said, his voice steady yet gentle. I know it can be hard to confront our biases, but it's important. Carol nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a mix of vulnerability and determination. I've lived my whole life thinking one way, and I realize now that I need to change. This has opened my eyes, even if it took a scene like this to get there. The second officer stepped forward, a hint of a smile on his face. This is what we like to see. It's never easy to confront our fears and prejudices, but having the courage to do so is a step in the right direction. Greg placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. You handled this situation with grace, Marcus. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and advocating for understanding. Thanks, Greg, Marcus replied, feeling a swell of gratitude for his manager's support. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. I just hope this can be a turning point for all of us. As the officers began to wrap up their notes, the gathering of neighbors started to disperse. Some lingered, exchanging words of encouragement with Marcus, while others offered Carol tentative smiles. It was clear that the community was beginning to heal, even in small ways. Can I ask you something, Marcus? Carol said, her voice softer now. Of course, he replied, curiosity piquing. Do you think it's possible for someone like me to change? To see the world differently? She asked, her vulnerability apparent. Marcus considered her question, weighing his response carefully. Change is possible for anyone who is willing to put in the work. It starts with understanding and listening. You've taken the first step by acknowledging your fears. That's a big deal. Carol took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. I want to be better. I don't want to live in fear or let it dictate my actions anymore. That's the spirit, Marcus said, offering her a warm smile. It's a journey, but every step counts. And you're not alone in this. We can all work together to create a more inclusive community. As they spoke, the officers finished their paperwork, preparing to leave. The second officer turned to Marcus and Greg. It's clear that this situation could have escalated much further. Thank you both for keeping it civil and constructive. Thank you for handling it professionally, Greg replied, nodding in appreciation. Remember, the first officer added, the key to resolving conflict is open communication. Keep talking to each other, and don't let fear dictate your actions. With that, the officers climbed into their patrol car, leaving Marcus and Carol standing in the parking lot, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Marcus turned to Carol, feeling a sense of camaraderie that had emerged from the ashes of their earlier confrontation. If you're serious about wanting to change, I'd be happy to help. Maybe we can organize a community meeting, bring people together to share their experiences. I'd like that, Carol replied, a hint of excitement in her voice. I think it's time for some honest conversations in this neighborhood. The two exchanged contact information, a tangible connection forged from what had initially been a divisive encounter. They stood there for a moment, both aware of the significance of what had just transpired. Thank you, Marcus, Carol said, her voice sincere. I appreciate your understanding and willingness to help me see things differently. Thank you for being willing to listen, he replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment. It's not easy to confront these issues, but it's worth it. As they began to walk towards their cars, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. This experience had not only changed Carol's perspective, but had also solidified his own commitment to fostering dialogue and understanding in his community. The following weeks brought about significant changes in their neighborhood. Carol and Marcus worked together to organize community meetings, inviting residents to share their stories, fears, and hopes. Slowly, walls began to crumble as people from different backgrounds came together to engage in open, honest conversations. The meetings became a safe space for dialogue, where misunderstandings could be addressed and connections built. Marcus found himself empowered, not just by his own experiences, but by the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. Carol, too, began to transform. She became more active in the community, participating in local events and advocating for inclusivity. It was inspiring to see her growth, and Marcus felt a sense of pride in having played a role in her journey. Through their collective efforts, the neighborhood began to feel more united. People started to recognize the beauty in diversity, understanding that their differences could be a source of strength rather than division. As the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere of the community. The initial confrontation that had seemed so daunting had evolved into a catalyst for growth, understanding, and healing. One evening, as Marcus stood outside his apartment, he looked across the street at the community center where one of their meetings was taking place. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a beautiful symphony of voices coming together in harmony. In that moment, he knew that change was possible when people were willing to confront their fears and embrace understanding. Thank you for believing in the power of kindness, Marcus whispered to himself, a smile spreading across his face. This is just the beginning. As he turned to head inside, he felt a sense of warmth and belonging wash over him. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was one worth taking. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.